Now, we speak to our foreign editor, Sophie Mokoena, and also let's look at the security situation. So the attack in Palma, that gas city, was well organized. People were killed, beheaded. Militants attacked vehicles trying to escape a besieged hotel, and we know South Africans were involved. But the full scale of casualties is unclear. Nobody knows. We're joined by Sophie Mokoena and senior researcher from the Institute of Security Studies, that's Liesl Louw-Vaudran. Thank you both. Let me start with you, Ms. Louw-Vaudran. So the bishop there was saying that since 2017 attacks have been taking place, but even he, who's been on the ground and spoken to people affected, don't really know what these insurgents want or why they're behaving like they do. Can you explain to us what is this fight all about?
Yes, good evening, Francis. It's extremely difficult, and we have been following, doing studies on the ground when it was still possible, because the Mozambican government has been really reluctant to let even media into, try and understand and do research on this insurgency in Cabo Delgado. But what we know is it started as a small group of extremists. It grew through the fact that Cabo Delgado is a marginalized area. It's the far northernmost province of Mozambique. And then there were these massive gas finds, the gas projects that started, and the promise of billions of dollars flowing in. There were also mines, ruby mines. People were thrown off their land. So there's frustration, marginalization. Unfortunately, this group has grown very much like we've seen in other parts of the continent. In the Sahel, in the Lake Chad Basin, Boko Haram around, it was northeastern Nigeria, and then spread through to parts of Chad and Niger and Cameroon. And really, in some of those places, there are natural resources, but not in all of them. So it's a kind of a toxic mix. Sometimes also it includes trafficking. That part of Cabo Delgado, and especially the coast of Mozambique, has been renowned for drug trafficking and all sorts of illegal corrupt activities. So as I say, unfortunately, we have seen in the rest of Africa this kind of insurgency developed, and it's not clear, number one, what the exact aims are. Is it territorial expansion? And then we know that southern Tanzania and Malawi and so on might also be threatened. Or, is it really also to get their hands on some of the resources? How to combat it is even more difficult, Francis.
And very quickly, the people committing the atrocities, would those be Mozambicans who, like you say, feel marginalized, left out of the projects in their poor areas? Or is there a lot of support? We know they're linked to ISIS. Are there arms, guns coming in?
Yes, all the eyewitness reports that we've seen, and people are saying, people are speaking the local language. In even some of the eyewitness accounts, people say they recognize some of the attackers. When they took this port of Mozambique prior last year, it seemed very clear that the majority are locals. There have also been other Tanzanian, Congolese, etc., and others that have been, when the few times that we have actually seen arrests, but their numbers have grown, their sophistication, their planning, and their weapons. And now, as I said, they're occupying some strategic ports, so they can get supplies and so on from outside. The Islamic State of the Central African province has claimed responsibility for some of these attacks. But our assessment is that this is a homegrown, a lot like Boko Haram in a way, a homegrown insurgency that has now expanded, and that there are certainly now links with international terrorism.
All right, Sophie Mokoena, our foreign editor, on the line. Sophie, so the situation sounds dire, but as far as I know, there's been no official appeal for military intervention from Mozambique, from surrounding countries, and many asking, what is SADC doing? What is the AU doing? There has been a statement. Does it go far enough?
Yes, this morning the AU Commission Chair, Musa Faki Mahamat, issued a statement where he called for an urgent, coordinated international action. And I think, as Liesl pointed out, it is difficult to really make sense of what he is saying in terms of whether he is calling for military intervention or what. Because when you say international action, what kind of action? Are you talking about the humanitarian assistance, or are you talking about military intervention? Because if that's the case, the AU is supposed to call the Peace and Security Council urgent meeting to discuss how is AU going to intervene. The same with SADC. SADC is supposed to call an urgent meeting of the Troika. Yes, President Masisi said yesterday he spoke to President Ramaphosa, he spoke to President Mnangagwa, the two being part of the Troika. But you have to also involve the current chair, Mozambique, and the incoming chair, Malawi. Therefore, you must call an urgent Troika meeting, and there you can come up with a proposal in terms of action. And if it is a military action, you will have to communicate with respective countries in terms of parliament to make them aware that your troops will be deployed in Mozambique. Therefore, it is not a decision that you can take now and act now. But what we do know is that the World Food Program, the United Nations Agency World Food Program, is assisting in terms of the humanitarian crisis that is there. And they say they are hoping to reach more than 50,000 people to assist them with food. These people are in Pemba, in areas and districts such as Muenda and Nangade.
And Sophie, I mean, the question is, in terms of pushing back the insurgency, does Mozambique, has it indicated at all that it wants the help of SADC or AU in terms of troops on the ground to help the government?
You had earlier on in that package from Isaac Lukanda from Tanzania, the neighbor. You know that this region is near the border of Tanzania, that President Nyusi from Mozambique is downplaying this whole thing. And yesterday we saw extra deployment of troops, Mozambican troops. And it will be difficult for neighbors to intervene because he must request help. But if he doesn't and he's downplaying the whole situation, it will be difficult for other countries to get involved.
Liesl, your comment on that, the possibilities of military intervention here, if Mozambique itself is not crying out for help, and why would Mozambique be downplaying a situation like this?
Yes, I agree fully with Sophie Mokoena on the fact that SADC must now organize a urgent Troika meeting, and the stumbling block seems to be that Mozambique doesn't want help from the neighbors. Is it because Mozambique doesn't want to admit that its army is too weak to actually safeguard citizens? Because I think there are two aspects to this. The first is a short-term bringing people to safety, helping victims, also making sure that this massive investment, you must know, Francis, there's a lot of South African investment from banks, etc., in this, in Palma and Afungi and that area. So the short term is to keep people safe, which would then require a military force, special forces, but one country. And it's not only Mozambique, we've seen that around the world. Nowhere can terrorism be even contained by one country. So Mozambique doesn't want to admit somehow that, that there is this crisis that it can't contain. And on the longer term, it would need the SADC member states, it would need the African Union, the United Nations to look at a holistic multilateral plan that would include other solutions than just military solutions, development in that area, humanitarian assistance, as Sophie also mentioned, the United Nations is already there. So we would need then a longer term strategy. What we don't want is for, and what is already happening, you have small numbers of Portuguese, United States troops coming in doing training, but we don't want internationalization of this crisis. Here in SADC, it would be unthinkable almost to have non-African troops, as we see in other countries in West Africa, for example, on our soil.
Very quickly, because I want to speak to Sophie about the humanitarian response as well. But if we look at South Africa's situation, I presume there's a risk to not getting too involved because we could become vulnerable down the line to insurgents. There's a risk to being involved because then we've seen that happens before, and then there are revenge attacks as well.
Of course, yes. And that's why I'm saying it's very tricky, and no one is blaming, I think, anyone for hesitating. I mean, they've been hesitating for almost 3 years now. So this is a very complex situation. But the answer would lie then in a SADC approach, in an African Union approach, so that South Africa is not seen to be acting bilaterally. We are the biggest country in SADC, so inevitably we would, if there was going to be a military intervention, we would take the lead probably, like we do in other instances, like in the Eastern DRC and so. But it is very complicated, but it's almost as if this is our neighbor, it's right on our doorstep. We have to help because, as I said, to secure our investment, secure our citizens, and to assist the citizens of Mozambique, we have little choice.
All right, Sophie, while we follow the AU and the SADC response, just tell us what we do know about those humanitarian efforts you were talking about. At least NGOs and the UN and big organizations are there, but are they able to help the people? The numbers are staggering.
Yes, the World Food Program is there. The United Nations agency, the World Food Program is there. And they are working with other agencies of the United Nations, particularly on issues of assisting those who are affected, those who are injured, receiving medical attention, but also the airlifting of those who are supposed to be taken to safe place. And the United Nations is doing that with a World Food Program. They are evacuating people in need, and particularly women and children, and those, of course, who are critically injured. They are providing food assistance, and the response here, it is the food parcel, if we have to use the South African context, where you have in a pack rice, vegetable oil, canned food, and all of that. And they are being distributed to people, as I indicated earlier on, in Palma, in neighboring districts, because some people are going to neighboring districts, such as Muenda and Nangada. And the World Food Program has called for more support from the international community. We are hoping that at some point in time, the United Nations Secretary General, Antonio Guterres, will make a appeal and use his voice, as head of this world body, to request other countries and other NGOs to assist the United Nations so that you can assist these ordinary citizens who are caught in a crossfire. Because the AU Commission Chair is saying, which speaks to the seriousness of this conflict, that there are international extremists who are part of this.
Yeah.
And therefore, it will get even worse and bigger. Yes, yesterday, Mozambique did reinforce. You don't know. They may have retreated either in South Africa, because it is not far from Maputo, Malawi, or Tanzania, and when there's a bit of a lull, they will attack. As we heard earlier on that the attack last week, it came at a time where people were thinking of going back to their respective villages. And therefore, even now, like Liesl has indicated, you then must come up with a lasting solution. Lasting solution will be political, will be economical, and it will be social. Unless you approach the conflict in those fronts, not ruling out military intervention, you will not find a solution. But like I say, for me, I expect the African Union to meet, particularly the Security Council of the African Union, to come up with a way forward. I expect an urgent troika, either contact meeting or Zoom, where the leaders, members of troika, including Mozambique, will discuss what must be done, military if it's possible, but also politically, economically, and socially, because people are suffering.
Yeah, the suffering is huge. Thank you very much, Foreign Editor Sophie Mokoena. And final question then for you, Liesl, what is a possible solution? If you were advising South Africa, what are the options here?
Yes, look, South Africa must just put its weight behind SADC. We are part of the Troika of the organ. In fact, from August, we will be chairing the organ, and we will have to lead this solution with the African Union and with the UN. And as Sophie said, as I said earlier, it has to be a holistic approach. We have to learn the lessons that we've learned elsewhere. 10 years down the line in the Sahel, we are now talking about development, preventing people from joining extremist groups through development, economic development, and so on. We must learn those lessons. And as South Africa, we have to work with the region to actually, over the long term, try and solve this crisis.
All right, Senior Researcher from the Institute of Security Studies, Liesl Louw-Vaudran, thank you very much for your time tonight. And yes, so much suffering. 700,000 people have been displaced, at least. We heard that from the Bishop earlier. Thousands have been killed, and he was talking about young children being kidnapped, boys to fight, girls basically to be sex slaves. And this all happening in a neighboring country to South Africa. We'll keep tabs on the situation very closely for you as far as we are able, given that there are not many camera people, journalists even allowed and even able to access those far-flung areas.